Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Edison, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. I stepped out of my rental car onto the dusty gravel driveway, the desert heat hitting me like a wall even though the sun was setting. My grandparents' trailer sat weathered and tired against the vast New Mexico landscape, its aluminum siding reflecting the last orange rays of daylight. I hadn't been back to the reservation in 3 years, and the familiar smell of sage and dry earth brought back childhood memories I thought I'd forgotten. The Navajo Nation Fair had been everything I remembered and more. Fry bread vendors lined the dusty walkways. Children ran between carnival rides while their parents caught up with relatives they hadn't seen in months, and the evening air buzzed with laughter and traditional music. My grandmother Patricia had insisted we stay until the last dance competition ended, her weathered hands clapping enthusiastically as young performers moved in intricate patterns under the string lights. By the time we returned to the trailer, it was well past 9 o'clock. My grandfather Vincent moved slowly up the wooden steps, his arthritic joints protesting after hours of walking on uneven fairground terrain. The trailer's interior felt cramped but welcoming, filled with family photographs spanning decades, and the lingering aroma of the mutton stew Patricia had prepared that morning. We settled into the small living room, my cousin James and I sharing the worn plaid couch while my Aunt Rita claimed the reclining chair that had seen better days. The conversation flowed naturally between English and Navajo. Stories about distant relatives mixing with good-natured gossip about neighbors and friends. My grandmother's eyes sparkled as she recounted tales from her childhood, her voice carrying the musical quality that made even mundane stories captivating. The hours slipped by unnoticed. James shared updates about his job at the power plant, while Rita described her daughter's recent graduation from college. Vincent occasionally interjected with dry humor that made us all laugh, his timing perfect despite his advancing age. The familiar sounds of the trailer settling around us created a comforting backdrop to our reunion. As the clock on the kitchen wall approached 2 in the morning, fatigue should have been settling into my bones. Instead, I felt oddly energized, perhaps from the excitement of being home or the strong coffee Patricia had served with dessert. The conversation had lulled into comfortable silence when curiosity got the better of me. "Are skinwalkers real?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them. The transformation in the room was immediate and unsettling. Patricia's face drained of color, her warm expression replaced by something that looked like fear mixed with anger. Vincent's jovial demeanor vanished entirely, his weathered features hardening into stern lines. Even James, who had been relaxed moments before, straightened in his seat with obvious discomfort. "We don't talk about such things," Patricia said firmly, rising from her chair with surprising speed. "Speaking of them brings attention we don't want." Her voice carried a weight that made my stomach clench with unease. Without another word, she gathered Vincent and disappeared into their bedroom, leaving the 3 of us sitting in awkward silence. The cheerful atmosphere that had filled the trailer moments before now felt heavy and oppressive. Rita shook her head at me, a mixture of disappointment and concern in her expression. "You shouldn't have asked that," she whispered, glancing toward the closed bedroom door. "Grandmother's right. Some things are better left alone." But instead of dropping the subject, Rita leaned forward and began speaking in hushed tones about her recent experiences in Farmington. She described waking in the middle of the night to sounds that defied explanation, screams that started human but devolved into something else entirely. The terror in her voice as she recounted trying to comfort her daughter, who had heard the same sounds and spent the rest of the night crying, made my skin crawl. "I told myself it was just coyotes," Rita continued, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "But coyotes don't sound like that. There was something underneath the screaming, something that made every instinct I had tell me to run and hide." James listened with growing unease, occasionally glancing toward the windows as if expecting something to appear. The trailer felt smaller somehow, the walls thinner, the darkness outside more threatening. When Rita finished her account, we sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. Eventually, Fatigue began to take hold, and we prepared for bed. James headed to the spare room while Rita settled onto the pull-out couch in the living room. I made myself comfortable on an air mattress in the corner, but despite my exhaustion, rest remained elusive. The conversation replayed in my mind, Patricia's fear and Rita's trembling voice echoing in the darkness. The trailer's windows were open to catch the desert breeze, and every small sound seemed amplified in the stillness. The settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through dry grass, the distant hum of the refrigerator, all became part of a symphony that kept me alert and listening. The silence outside was wrong. In all my visits to the reservation, I had never experienced such complete quiet. No cricket songs, no distant howling of coyotes, no rustle of small animals moving through the brush. It was as if the entire desert had been stripped of life, leaving only an oppressive void that pressed against the thin walls of the trailer. I lay on my air mattress, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself that the unsettling conversation had simply made me paranoid. The luminous hands of my watch showed 3:15 in the morning when I first heard the footsteps. They were deliberate but cautious, the sound of something trying not to be detected while moving across the gravelly area behind the trailer. Each step seemed calculated, placed with the precision of a predator stalking its prey. My heart began hammering against my ribs as I strained to identify the source of the sound. Rising carefully from my makeshift bed, I crept toward the kitchen window that faced the backyard. The single porch light cast a weak yellow glow across a small portion of the property, creating more shadows than illumination. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The old picnic table where we'd eaten lunch, the scattered lawn chairs, the line of cars parked parallel to the gravel road. Then I saw it. Behind Vincent's pickup truck, a shape moved with fluid grace that seemed at odds with its awkward posture. It was roughly the size of a large dog, but something about its proportions was fundamentally wrong. The torso appeared too long, the legs positioned at angles that defied natural anatomy. Its fur was matted and dark, hanging in clumps that caught the weak light in unsettling ways. The creature's eyes reflected the porch light with an orange glow that burned into my memory. They held an intelligence that was distinctly malevolent, a focused hatred that seemed directed specifically at the trailer and everyone inside it. When it moved, there was a hitching quality to its gait, as if it was still learning how to coordinate its borrowed limbs. My mouth went dry as I watched it circle Vincent's truck, its head turning constantly as it scanned the area. The smell hit me then, a nauseating combination of decay and corruption that seemed to seep through the window screen and fill my nostrils. It was the smell of something that had been dead and rotting, then somehow reanimated into a mockery of life. I backed away from the window, my legs trembling as I stumbled down the narrow hallway toward my mother's room. She was staying in the small guest bedroom, and I shook her awake with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Mom," I whispered urgently, "there's something outside." She sat up immediately, her maternal instincts overriding the fog of interrupted dreams. "What do you mean, something?" "Behind the cars. It looks like a coyote, but it's wrong. Everything about it is wrong." She followed me back to the kitchen window, and we both peered out into the darkness. The creature had moved closer to the trailer, positioning itself near the propane tanks on the side of the building. In the better light, we could see more details that made my skin crawl. Its fur was sparse in places, revealing patches of skin that looked mottled and diseased. The way it held its head suggested intelligence, but there was also something deeply disturbed about its movements. It would pause periodically, tilting its head as if listening to sounds we couldn't hear, then continue its restless pacing. The thing began to vocalize, a low, guttural sound that started as a moan but evolved into something that resembled distorted human speech. The words, if they were words, were unintelligible, but the malevolent intention behind them was unmistakable. The sound penetrated the trailer's thin walls and seemed to vibrate in our bones. My mother grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. "Get Vincent," she whispered. "Now." I crept to my grandparents' bedroom and tapped gently on the door. Vincent emerged within seconds, fully alert despite having been asleep moments before. When I described what we'd seen, his expression grew grim and determined. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small handgun and a leather pouch containing what looked like gray ash. With practiced movements, he began coating several bullets with the powdery substance, muttering prayers in Navajo under his breath. "Wake everyone," he instructed quietly. "Get them into the living room, away from the windows." Within minutes, the entire family had gathered in the center of the trailer, huddled together like survivors of a disaster. Patricia clutched her rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer, while Rita held her daughter close. James positioned himself near the front door, baseball bat in hand. Vincent moved to the kitchen window and peered out. The creature had grown bolder, approaching the trailer's steps with a limping gait that somehow made it more threatening rather than less. It paused at the bottom of the wooden steps, raised its malformed head, and released a howl that made everyone in the room flinch. The sound was layered with wrong harmonics, as if multiple voices were trying to emerge from a single throat. It conveyed rage, hunger, and something else that I couldn't identify but instinctively feared. Vincent responded by flinging open the front door and shouting commands in Navajo, his voice carrying authority and anger. When the creature didn't retreat, he raised the gun and fired 2 shots in rapid succession. The bullets struck the ground near the thing's feet, sending up small puffs of dust and ash. The creature recoiled as if it had been physically struck, then turned and fled with impossible speed, disappearing into the darkness beyond the porch light's reach. The sunrise should have brought relief, but instead it revealed the evidence of our nighttime visitor's presence. Deep scratches marked the wooden steps where the creature had paused, and several of Patricia's potted plants had been overturned and scattered. The nauseating smell lingered in the morning air, mixing unpleasantly with the scent of sage and desert flowers. Vincent walked the perimeter of the property, his weathered face grave as he examined the tracks left in the soft earth. The prints were disturbing, elongated paw prints that occasionally showed what looked like finger marks, as if the creature had been walking on its hind legs at times. "It was testing us," he said when he returned to the trailer, seeing how we would react, what our defenses might be. A friend of Vincent's, a medicine man named Robert, arrived around 8 o'clock that morning. He was an elderly man with silver hair braided down his back and eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. After hearing our account of the night's events, he began a blessing ritual that lasted over an hour. Robert moved through each room of the trailer, burning cedar and sage while chanting in Navajo. The smoke from his bundle of sacred herbs created intricate patterns in the still air, and I found the rhythmic cadence of his prayers oddly comforting. He sprinkled corn pollen at each window and doorway, creating protective barriers that were invisible but somehow tangible. When he finished, Robert spoke to all of us together, his voice carrying the weight of generations of accumulated wisdom. "What visited you last night is dangerous and persistent. It has marked this place and everyone in it. You must be vigilant and follow the old protections until it loses interest and moves on." The family spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, jumping at unexpected sounds and constantly checking the windows. I tried to convince myself that daylight would provide safety, that whatever had stalked us in the darkness wouldn't dare approach during the day. I was catastrophically wrong. Around 2 in the afternoon, I decided to help Rita clean out the bed of her pickup truck. We had been working for about 20 minutes, sorting through accumulated debris and loading trash bags, when I heard a low growling from somewhere behind the trailer. The sound was unmistakable, the same guttural rumble we had heard the night before, but hearing it in broad daylight, under the harsh New Mexico sun, made it somehow more terrifying. It suggested a boldness and confidence that turned my blood to slush in my veins. Rita and I froze, our eyes meeting across the truck bed. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what we both knew we had heard. The growling continued, a steady rumble that seemed to emanate from multiple directions at once. We moved carefully around the side of the trailer, following the sound toward a pile of discarded wooden pallets that Vincent had been meaning to dispose of. Perched on top of the unstable stack, as comfortable as a cat on a sunny windowsill, was our nocturnal visitor. In the harsh daylight, it looked even more wrong than it had in the darkness. Its fur was patchy and discolored, hanging in matted clumps that revealed areas of scarred, diseased-looking skin underneath. The creature's size seemed to shift as I watched, sometimes appearing smaller and more compact, other times stretching into elongated proportions that hurt to look at directly, its orange eyes fixed on us with unmistakable malevolence. There was an intelligence in that gaze that was more disturbing than any animal cunning. A calculating awareness that suggested it understood exactly what effect its presence was having on us. The thing opened its mouth, revealing teeth that were too numerous and positioned at wrong angles. A thick, dark liquid dripped from its jaws, staining the wooden pallets below. The smell of decay intensified, mixing with something chemical and acrid that made my eyes water. Without warning, the creature leaped from its perch with disturbing grace. Despite its apparent injuries from the night before, it moved with fluid precision, landing silently on the ground and immediately melting into the shadows cast by an old storage shed. Rita grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh with desperate strength. She began whispering prayers in Navajo, her voice shaking with terror and determination. We stood there for several minutes, scanning the area around the shed, but saw no further sign of the creature. When we returned to the trailer and reported what we had seen, the family's anxiety reached a new level. Patricia began preparing traditional protective items, small pouches of herbs and blessed corn pollen that we were instructed to carry at all times. Vincent cleaned and reloaded his gun, this time preparing twice as many ash-coated bullets. The afternoon dragged by with unbearable tension. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound potentially dangerous. The creature's willingness to appear in daylight had shattered our assumptions about when we might be safe, leaving us feeling vulnerable and exposed regardless of the time or circumstances. As evening approached, the family made a collective decision to spend the night elsewhere. Rita's sister lived about 30 miles away, and we began packing overnight bags with the desperate hope that distance might provide the safety that daylight had failed to offer. Despite our plans to leave, curiosity and a misguided sense of bravery led four of us to make a fateful decision. James suggested we investigate the old storage shed where the creature had disappeared that afternoon, reasoning that if something was attracting it to the property, we needed to identify and remove it before leaving. Vincent initially refused to consider such a reckless plan, but eventually the logic wore him down. If we could determine what was drawing the creature to us, we might be able to eliminate the threat permanently rather than simply running away and hoping it wouldn't follow. As the sun set behind the distant mesas, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, James, Rita, Vincent, and I made our way across the property toward the weathered shed. The structure was older than the trailer, its corrugated metal siding streaked with rust and age. Vincent carried his gun while the rest of us armed ourselves with flashlights and whatever improvised weapons we could find. The walk across the open ground felt interminable, though it couldn't have been more than 200 yards. Every step seemed to echo in the evening stillness, announcing our presence to anything that might be watching. The desert around us was bathed in the orange and purple hues of sunset, beautiful and terrible in its vastness. The shed's door hung slightly ajar, creaking gently in the evening breeze. Vincent approached first, gun raised and ready, while the rest of us positioned ourselves to either side of the entrance. The smell hit us before we could see inside, the same nauseating combination of decay and corruption that had marked the creature's presence. James pushed the door open wider, revealing the cluttered interior of the old storage space. Boxes of forgotten belongings were stacked haphazardly against the walls, interspersed with broken furniture and rusted tools. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust that showed no signs of recent disturbance. We entered cautiously, our flashlight beams sweeping across the accumulated debris of decades. I was examining a stack of water-damaged cardboard boxes when we heard the first scraping sound against the metal siding outside. The noise was subtle but unmistakable, the sound of claws or fingers dragging across the corrugated surface with deliberate slowness. It circled the building methodically, as if the creature was taking inventory of our exact positions within the confined space. Rita moved closer to the door, peering out through the narrow gap between the frame and the partially closed panel. Her sharp intake of breath told us she had seen something that confirmed our worst fears. "It's right outside," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the continuing scraping sounds. Vincent motioned for all of us to move away from the walls, clustering in the center of the shed where we would be furthest from the creature's reach. The scratching continued, sometimes pausing as if the thing was listening to our movements, then resuming with increased intensity. A low, rhythmic thumping began against the rear wall of the shed, as if something large was repeatedly throwing itself against the metal siding. The impacts weren't violent enough to breach the wall, but they were consistent and purposeful, creating a maddening percussion that seemed designed to drive us to panic. James reached for the door handle, intending to make a run for the trailer when the scratching suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the sounds had been, filled with anticipation and dread. Vincent nudged the door open just enough to peer outside, and what he saw made him immediately slam it shut and begin searching for something to use as a barricade. The creature was crouched directly in front of the shed, its malformed body positioned like a coiled spring, ready to launch itself forward. We began stacking boxes and broken furniture against the door, creating as substantial a barrier as the limited space and materials would allow. The thumping against the rear wall intensified, joined now by scratching sounds from multiple directions, as if the creature was circling the building while simultaneously attacking it. Through a small gap in the siding, I caught a glimpse of the thing as it moved past. Its proportions seemed to shift and flow in the dim light, sometimes appearing more canine, other times taking on disturbingly human characteristics. The orange glow of its eyes cast eerie shadows on the metal walls, creating dancing patterns that hurt to look at directly. The vocalizations began again, that horrible mixture of animal sounds and distorted human speech. But this time, the sounds seemed to be coming from directly above us, as if the creature had somehow positioned itself on the shed's roof. The metal groaned and buckled under what must have been considerable weight. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as the creature moved across the roof, its claws or feet creating a constant scratching that echoed through the confined space. Occasionally we would hear what sounded like words in the cacophony, fragments of English and Navajo mixed together in ways that made no linguistic sense but somehow conveyed malevolent intent. The assault continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The scratching, the thumping, the vocalizations, all ceased simultaneously, leaving us in a silence so complete it seemed to press against our eardrums. Vincent waited several minutes before carefully removing enough of our makeshift barricade to peer outside. The area around the shed appeared empty, but the smell of decay lingered in the air, and fresh gouges in the metal siding provided clear evidence of our visitors' presence. We made the return journey to the trailer in a tight group, constantly scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The familiar lights of the small building had never looked more welcoming, and we locked the door behind us with profound relief. The decision to leave the property the next morning was unanimous, but our hopes for safety were quickly shattered. We loaded 2 cars with overnight bags and drove toward Rita's sister's house, taking the winding road that connected our remote location to the more populated areas of the reservation. About 10 miles from the trailer, we stopped at a small grocery store to purchase supplies for our temporary relocation. The building was typical of reservation commerce, a single-story structure with weathered siding and hand-painted signs advertising everything from fresh mutton to phone cards. Was helping load grocery bags into the trunk of Vincent's car when Rita called out in a voice tight with fear. She was pointing toward the edge of the parking lot, where a line of desert shrubs created a natural barrier between the store and the open landscape beyond. There, partially concealed by the scrubby vegetation but clearly visible to anyone who knew what to look for, was our tormentor. The creature crouched motionless in the shadows, its orange eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent light from the store's exterior signs. What made the sighting particularly disturbing was the setting. This wasn't the isolated darkness of the trailer property or the concealment of the storage shed. This was broad daylight in a public space, with other customers moving in and out of the store and vehicles passing regularly on the nearby road. The thing's boldness in appearing so openly suggested a level of confidence that turned my stomach. It was no longer content to stalk us from the shadows. It wanted us to know we were being hunted, regardless of where we went or how many people were around. Several other customers had noticed the creature by now, and their reactions confirmed that this wasn't simply a case of mistaken identity or overactive imagination. A middle-aged woman loading groceries into her pickup truck stopped what she was doing and backed toward the store entrance, her eyes never leaving the spot where the creature lurked. An elderly man who had been checking his truck's tires straightened up and began speaking rapidly in Navajo to his companion, both of them casting nervous glances toward the creature's hiding spot. Their body language spoke of recognition and deep concern rather than mere curiosity about an unusual animal. The creature remained motionless for several long minutes, as if it was deliberately allowing us to observe it and register the implications of its presence. Then, with the same fluid grace we had witnessed before, it rose from its crouched position and moved away from the parking lot with an unhurried gait that somehow conveyed arrogance. We finished loading our groceries in silence, each of us processing the disturbing reality that our attempt to escape had been anticipated and countered. The creature wasn't simply haunting a specific location. It was following us, adapting its behavior to our movements and decisions. The drive to Rita's sister's house was tense, with all of us constantly checking mirrors and scanning the roadside for any sign of pursuit. The landscape that had always seemed welcoming and familiar now felt threatening and exposed, as if danger could emerge from behind any rock formation or stand of trees. When we arrived at our temporary refuge, Rita's sister Martha greeted us with obvious concern. Word of our situation had already reached her through the informal communication network that connected reservation families, and she had been expecting our arrival. Martha's house was larger and more modern than Vincent and Patricia's trailer, with better lighting and more secure doors and windows. We spent the first hour conducting a thorough inspection of the property, looking for any signs that the creature had preceded our arrival or discovered our new location. The afternoon passed quietly, and we began to hope that perhaps the distance and change of location had indeed provided the safety we sought. Martha prepared a large meal, and for the first time in days, the family gathered around a dining table without the constant tension that had marked our recent meals. As evening approached, however, familiar sounds began to emerge from the darkness outside. The scratching against exterior walls, the low growling, the disturbing vocalizations that mixed animal sounds with fragments of human speech, all had followed us to our new location. Martha's property was more open than Vincent's, with fewer hiding places and better sightlines in all directions. This should have been an advantage, but instead it seemed to make the creature bolder. It moved openly across the yard, circling the house with a confidence that suggested it no longer felt the need for concealment. The psychological impact of realizing that distance provided no protection was devastating. If the creature could track us anywhere we went, if it could appear in populated areas during daylight hours, if it could adapt its hunting behavior to any environment we chose, then traditional concepts of safety and refuge became meaningless. Vincent began preparing for another long night of vigilance, coating bullets with ash and positioning himself near the front windows where he would have the clearest field of fire. The rest of us gathered in the central living room, armed with flashlights and improvised weapons, settling in for what we all knew would be another sleepless ordeal. The third night brought an escalation that surpassed our worst fears. We had arranged ourselves throughout Martha's living room, trying to create defensive positions that would allow us to monitor all approaches to the house while staying away from windows and exterior walls. The initial sounds were familiar, the scratching against siding, the low growls, the circling movements around the perimeter of the building. But as the hours passed, the creature's behavior became increasingly aggressive and focused. Around midnight, the scratching concentrated on the front door, becoming more intense and purposeful. We could hear the wood splintering under whatever claws or tools the creature was using, and small pieces of debris began falling from the door frame onto the interior floor. Vincent positioned himself directly in front of the door, gun raised and ready, while the rest of us clustered behind furniture that might provide minimal protection. Patricia and Martha had begun chanting in Navajo, their voices rising in traditional prayers that seemed to resonate in the confined space. The attack on the door intensified, with gouging sounds that suggested the creature was methodically working to breach our defenses. The door was solid wood, much sturdier than the trailer's lightweight construction, but even it began to show signs of damage under the persistent assault. Deep scratches appeared in the interior surface, visible evidence that whatever was outside possessed both the tools and the determination to eventually break through. Wood chips scattered across the floor with each impact, creating a growing pile of debris that marked the creature's progress. The vocalizations that accompanied the physical attack were the most disturbing aspect of the entire ordeal. The sounds had evolved beyond simple animal noises or distorted speech fragments into something that resembled a conversation, as if the creature was speaking to itself or to us, describing its intentions in a language that bypassed rational understanding and communicated directly with our deepest fears. At one point, the sound stopped completely and we heard what seemed to be breathing just outside the door. The silence was more terrifying than the active assault had been, filled with the anticipation of whatever might come next. Vincent called out in Navajo, his voice carrying authority and anger as he demanded that the creature leave our family alone. His words seemed to provoke a response because the attack resumed with doubled intensity, accompanied by a howling that made everyone in the room cover their ears. The sound penetrated the walls and seemed to vibrate in our bones, carrying harmonics that no natural throat could produce. It conveyed rage and hunger in equal measures. But underneath those emotions was something else, a kind of satisfaction, as if the creature was enjoying our terror and drawing strength from our fear. Martha joined Patricia in the protective chanting, and their combined voices created a counterpoint to the creature's howling that seemed to provide some relief from its psychological impact. But the physical assault on the door continued, with splinters of wood now flying several feet into the room with each impact. Just when it seemed the door might give way entirely, the attack stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The silence that followed was absolute. No scratching, no growling, no movement of any kind. We waited in tense anticipation for several minutes before Vincent carefully approached the damaged door. The exterior surface was scored with deep gouges that revealed the pale wood underneath the weathered finish. Some of the scratches were clustered around the door handle and lock, suggesting the creature had been trying to figure out the mechanism, while others formed random patterns that seemed to serve no practical purpose. Vincent opened the door just enough to peer outside, gun at the ready. The yard appeared empty, but the overwhelming smell of decay hung in the night air like a physical presence. Fresh tracks in the soft earth around the doorstep showed where the creature had positioned itself during the attack. We spent the remainder of the night in shifts, with 2 people always awake and watching while the others tried to rest. But genuine rest was impossible under the circumstances, and dawn found us all exhausted and on edge, jumping at every small sound. The damage to the door provided physical evidence of what we had experienced, but it also represented something more troubling. Proof that the creature was capable of persistent, focused attacks that could eventually breach our defenses if given enough time and opportunity. The morning after the door attack brought Robert back to us, this time accompanied by another medicine man whose reputation for dealing with malevolent spirits extended throughout the reservation. The second elder, named Gary, was younger than Robert, but carried himself with the same quiet authority that marked those who understood forces beyond ordinary experience. The 2 men examined the damage to Martha's door with grave expressions, speaking to each other in hushed Navajo while tracing the scratch patterns with their fingers. Their body language suggested that what they were seeing confirmed their worst fears about the nature of our tormentor. "This one is very strong," Gary finally said, addressing all of us as we stood in Martha's living room. "It has fed on fear and attention for many days now, growing bolder and more powerful with each encounter." Robert nodded in agreement, opening a leather satchel that contained various items for the blessing ritual they were about to perform. "We must perform a comprehensive cleansing, not just of this house, but of all of you individually. The creature has marked you, and those marks must be removed before it will lose interest." The ritual that followed was unlike anything I had previously witnessed. Both men began by smudging each room of the house with burning sage and cedar, creating thick clouds of aromatic smoke that seemed to cling to the walls and ceiling. They chanted continuously in Navajo, their voices weaving together in complex harmonies that seemed to resonate with something beyond the physical world. Each family member was individually blessed, with the medicine men using eagle feathers to direct the sacred smoke around our bodies while speaking prayers that were both protective and cleansing. The sensation was difficult to describe, a feeling of heaviness being lifted, as if invisible threads that had been binding us to something malevolent were being severed one by one. Gary produced a collection of crystals and stones from his pouch, arranging them in specific patterns around Martha's property. He explained that these would create barriers that malevolent spirits would find difficult to cross. providing ongoing protection even after the blessing ritual was complete. The most intensive part of the ceremony involved the preparation of special protective items for each of us to carry. Small leather pouches were filled with a mixture of blessed herbs, ash from sacred fires, and other materials whose names were not shared with those outside the traditional knowledge system. Robert and Gary worked together to charge these items with protective energy, holding each pouch while chanting specific prayers and breathing sacred smoke over them. The process took nearly an hour, with both men maintaining their focus and intensity throughout the entire procedure. When the blessing was complete, both medicine men spoke to us about the precautions we would need to take in the coming days and weeks. We were instructed to carry the protective pouches at all times, to avoid speaking about our experiences with the creature to anyone outside the immediate family, and to continue the daily smudging and prayer routines they had taught us. The creature will test these protections, Gary warned. It may return once or twice more, but each time it will find it more difficult to affect you. Eventually it will seek easier prey and leave you alone. The psychological impact of the blessing ritual was immediate and profound. For the first time in days, the constant weight of dread that had been pressing down on all of us began to lift. The house itself felt different, lighter, somehow more secure, as if invisible walls had been erected around us. That evening passed without incident. We remained vigilant, maintaining our defensive positions and keeping watch throughout the night, but the familiar sounds of our tormentor's presence never materialized. The silence felt different than it had on previous nights, peaceful rather than ominous, restful rather than threatening. Even more encouraging was the change in the family's behavior and demeanor. Conversations resumed their normal flow, laughter returned to our interactions, and the constant tension that had marked every moment for the past several days gradually began to ease. Gary and Robert returned the following morning to check on the effectiveness of their work and to perform additional blessings on Vincent and Patricia's trailer before we returned there. They reported that the spiritual energy around all of us had changed dramatically, and that the creature's hold over our family had been significantly weakened. 2 weeks have passed since that final blessing ritual, and our lives have slowly returned to something resembling normalcy. The protective items Gary and Robert prepared for us remain constantly in our possession, and we continue the daily smudging and prayer routines they taught us, but the overwhelming sense of being hunted has finally begun to fade. We returned to Vincent and Patricia's trailer after the medicine men blessed the property, and while the first few nights were tense, no signs of the creature's presence have materialized. The scratches on the wooden steps have been sanded away and painted over, and Patricia has replaced the plants that were disturbed during those terrifying first encounters. But complete peace of mind remains elusive. Every unexpected sound in the night still triggers a moment of panic. Every shadow glimpsed in peripheral vision causes a spike of adrenaline. The experience has left marks on each of us that will likely never completely fade. James has returned to his job at the power plant, but he calls Vincent and Patricia every evening to check on them, and he's installed motion sensor lights around their property. Rita has moved her daughter to stay with relatives in Albuquerque temporarily, unwilling to risk a return of the creature to the Farmington area where her earlier experiences had taken place. The physical evidence of our encounters has largely been erased or repaired, but the psychological impact lingers in ways both subtle and profound. Family gatherings now include routine smudging ceremonies, and conversations about traditional beliefs carry a weight and respect that wasn't always present before. I find myself researching skinwalker encounters online, reading accounts from other families who have faced similar ordeals. The stories are remarkably consistent in their details: the orange glowing eyes, the wrong proportions, the mixture of animal and human characteristics, the psychological warfare designed to break down the victim's defenses through sustained terror. What strikes me most in these accounts is how the experiences change people permanently. Even those who successfully drive off their tormentors carry the knowledge that certain kinds of evil exist in the world, that the boundaries between the natural and supernatural are far more porous than most people believe. The medicine men warned us that speaking too openly about our experiences could potentially draw unwanted attention again, so I've been careful about who I share this story with and how much detail I provide. but the need to document what happened, to create a record that might help others who face similar situations, feels important enough to justify the risk. Sometimes, in the early hours of the morning when the desert is at its quietest, I still find myself listening for familiar sounds. The scratching against exterior walls, the low growling, the disturbing vocalizations that haunted our nights for nearly a week. The absence of these sounds brings relief, but also a persistent awareness that they could return at any time. The protective items we carry have become as routine as car keys or wallets, but their presence serves as a constant reminder of how close we came to something that defied rational explanation. The fact that traditional protective methods proved effective when modern security measures would have been useless has fundamentally altered my understanding of how the world actually works. My grandmother Patricia rarely speaks about those terrifying days, but occasionally I catch her glancing out windows with an alertness that wasn't there before our encounters. Vincent has returned to his normal routines, but he still keeps the gun loaded with ash-coated bullets in easy reach, and he checks the locks on doors and windows every night before bed. The experience has strengthened our family bonds in unexpected ways. Having faced something genuinely threatening together, having relied on each other for protection and support during those dark hours, has created connections that transcend normal family relationships. We are bound now by shared knowledge of forces that most people never encounter, and hopefully never will. Still can't drive past that grocery store where we saw the creature stalking us in broad daylight without feeling a chill of recognition and residual fear. The fact that it was willing to appear so openly, in such a public setting, continues to disturb me more than any of the nighttime encounters around the trailer. The desert landscape that had always seemed peaceful and welcoming now carries different associations. Every stand of brush could conceal a threat. Every shadow could hide something malevolent. Every unusual sound could signal the return of our tormentor. This hypervigilance may fade with time, but for now, it remains a constant companion. What haunts me most is not the memory of the creature itself, but the knowledge that it's still out there somewhere, perhaps stalking another family, perhaps lying dormant until some future trigger awakens its interest. The medicine men's protections freed us from its immediate attention, but they didn't destroy it or send it back to whatever realm it came from. The prayers continue, the protective items remain close at hand, and the family stays connected through regular phone calls and visits that serve multiple purposes, maintaining relationships, checking on each other's safety, and providing mutual support for the ongoing process of healing from trauma that few outsiders would understand or believe. I wake up each morning grateful for the peaceful night that preceded it, but also aware that this peace came at a cost and must be actively maintained through continued vigilance and respect for forces that exist beyond the boundaries of ordinary human experience. The skinwalker may be gone, but the knowledge of what exists in the darkness remains forever. I've been in this farmhouse my whole life, so nights out here usually feel familiar, almost comforting. You learn to tune out the usual creaks in the old wood, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft chirping that drifts in through the windows. But that evening in early May, something put me on edge. It started as I was going through my usual end-of-day routine. My parents were visiting my sister 2 counties over, leaving me alone to manage the property for the week. The solitude never bothered me before. I'd spent countless nights by myself in this house, but tonight felt different somehow. The living room lamp clicked off, leaving the space a lot darker than I remembered. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and expectant. I headed to the front windows for my final pass, just to be sure everything was locked up tight. The farm spread out before me, bathed in pale moonlight that cast long shadows across the fields. Our cattle were dark shapes in the distance, most of them lying down for the night. I nearly convinced myself I was being paranoid when a faint glow caught my eye outside. At first I thought I was imagining it. 2 spots of light hovered near the tree line, too high off the ground to be a stray cat or a fox. I blinked hard, squinting into the darkness. The spots remained, unmoving, fixed in place like twin stars fallen to earth. I took off my glasses, rubbed my eyes and looked again, but they were gone. My brain scrambled to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe fireflies caught in a gust of wind or a reflection of the moon on broken glass. Still, I made certain to lock every door and window before heading upstairs, my heart thumping a little harder than I'd care to admit. The floorboards protested beneath my weight as I climbed the stairs. Each room I passed seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper, more substantial somehow. When I finally reached my bedroom, I closed the door firmly behind me, something I rarely did. The night air felt unusually still, almost stagnant. Despite the open window, no breeze stirred the curtains. I didn't sleep well. Every sound from outside seemed amplified, branches scraping against the siding, the distant call of an owl, the soft rustling of leaves. Each noise jolted me from the edge of sleep, leaving me staring wide-eyed at the ceiling, ears straining for something I couldn't name. Dawn arrived too fast, and I was already dragging myself out of bed to tend the animals. The morning light failed to dispel the unease that had settled over me during the night. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the fatigue that clung to me like a second skin. I hopped into my boots, stepped outside, and got hit with a stale, humid smell floating on the morning breeze. It felt wrong somehow, but I shoved that aside and focused on chores. The grass was wet with dew, soaking the hems of my jeans as I trudged toward the barn. My first stop was the barn. The horses were fine, just a bit restless. They shifted nervously in their stalls, ears flicking back and forth. When I approached with their feed, they snorted and shied away, eyes rolling. I'd never seen them so agitated. "Easy, easy," I murmured, holding out my hand. "What's got you all worked up this morning?" The real shock came when I checked on the cows. There were fewer than yesterday. I counted at least twice, but it didn't add up. 28 yesterday, 26 today. 2 missing. Maybe I miscounted before, or maybe some had wandered off. That's when I noticed the fence. What used to be a sturdy section was torn and sagging, like something big and strong had barreled right through it. Splintered wood jutted at weird angles. Barbed wire, which had been tightly strung just yesterday, hung in loose coils. I leaned in for a closer look and saw footprints in the dirt. They were strange, almost a hybrid shape. Part hoof, part something else entirely. Too large for a deer, too misshapen for a bear. My family's taught me all about local wildlife, yet these tracks didn't match anything I'd seen or heard about. The uneasy feeling I'd had the night before started creeping back, settling in the pit of my stomach like a cold stone. I knelt down, examining the prints more closely. They were deep, as if whatever made them carried significant weight. And there was something else. A faint sour odor hung in the air around the damaged fence, reminiscent of spoiled meat. I checked the rest of the property, finding no other clues, so I tried to move on, patching the fence as best I could until I had help. The work was mindless enough, but my thoughts kept drifting back to those lights in the darkness, the missing cattle, the strange footprints. None of it made sense. As the day dragged on, I found it tough to focus. Every sound from the woods made me jump. My phone lit up with a text from my girlfriend, Mia. She wanted to know if we were still on for dinner that weekend. I started typing a response, but my mind wasn't in it. My message came out short, almost curt. She noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling, this nameless dread that had taken root inside me. I deflected, blaming my mood on lack of sleep and the pressure of managing the farm alone. The conversation blew up into a full-on fight. It left me tense and itching to clear my head. So after dusk, I grabbed my phone and headphones, heading off toward the forest. In retrospect, it was a stupid decision, but at the time, I just needed to get away from the house, from the damaged fence, from the memory of those gleaming eyes in the darkness. I've hiked through these woods 1,000 times, but this was different. The familiar paths seemed altered somehow, the trees closer together, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Something about the night air felt oppressive, like it was charged with static electricity. The hair on my arm stood on end despite the warmth of the evening. I cranked up my music to overpower my thoughts and wandered deeper than I intended. The heavy bass thrummed in my ears, drowning out the sounds of the forest. Time seemed to slip away from me as I walked, my feet carrying me forward without conscious thought. Before I knew it, darkness was everywhere. The sun had set completely, leaving only the faint glow of a quarter moon filtering through the canopy overhead. I stopped, suddenly aware of how far I'd come. The farmhouse was nowhere in sight. I flipped on my phone's flashlight, sweeping it around. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of underbrush and tree trunks. Shadows danced and shifted with each movement of my hand. I caught the reflection of something that looked like eyes in the beam, high behind a tree. Not animalized, too tall, too stationary. As soon as I angled my phone that way, the reflection vanished, leaving me reeling from a rush of panic. Maybe it was a trick of the light again, or maybe not. I pulled out my earbuds, suddenly desperate to hear what might be around me. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No insects chirping, no rustling of nocturnal creatures. Just heavy, waiting silence. A growl rippled through the trees, low and ragged, unlike anything I'd heard in these woods. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. I'd heard those before. This was deeper, almost guttural, with an odd, wet quality to it that made my skin crawl. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and I realized I had no clue where the path went. Shadows seemed to shift and move at the corners of my vision. My flashlight beam trembled as my hand began to shake. I started to backtrack, stumbling over roots and tangling my boots in undergrowth. My flashlight shook with each step, casting wild patterns across the forest floor. Every tree, every bush seemed to conceal some nameless threat. The darkness pressed in, thick as smoke. Then a sharp snap like a branch being crushed underfoot sounded close. Too close. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound had come from somewhere to my left, just beyond the reach of my light. Fear surged in my chest, hot and urgent. I had to get out. My jog turned into a full-on sprint, branches slapping my face and arms. Thorns tore at my clothes, but I barely felt the sting. All I could focus on was moving forward, getting away from whatever lurked in the shadows behind me. I could hear it now, something large crashing through the underbrush, keeping pace with me. It moved with a strange, loping gait, sometimes on all fours, sometimes upright. The sound of its pursuit drove me faster, my lungs burning with each gasping breath. When I finally saw the farmhouse lights in the distance, I breathed a silent prayer of relief. The field stretched out before me, open and exposed in the moonlight. I burst from the tree line, legs pumping desperately. I hopped the broken fence, nearly face-planting on the other side. My foot caught on a loose wire, sending me sprawling into the dirt. I scrambled up immediately, whirling around to face the woods. Something moved at the tree line, tall, menacing, with eyes that gleamed faintly in the dark. It stood partially obscured by the shadows, but I could make out a vague silhouette, large, hunched, with what looked like antlers or horns jutting from its head. A vile odor hit me, intense enough to make me gag. The smell of decay, of things long dead and rotting in the summer heat. It never advanced. It just stood there, watching with a stillness that felt deliberate, like it was studying me. I forced myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. My heart hammered as I peeked out a window, only to glimpse that pair of eyes still trained on me. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just stared, fixed on the house like twin beacons. Enough was enough. I yanked the blinds down, shut off every light, and made my way to my room, grabbing the old shotgun from my closet just to steady my nerves. It was my grandfather's, a Remington pump-action that I'd learned to shoot when I was 12. I checked the chamber, loaded it, and sat on the edge of my bed, the cold metal a reassuring weight in my hands. That night, sleep was a distant thing. My thoughts were in a whirl. Cows disappearing, fences torn, footprints with no reasonable explanation, and a hulking silhouette crouched at the edge of my land. I tried to convince myself I'd wake up and find a neat explanation, but I knew deep down that something big and unknown was stalking these woods. I woke the next morning with the shotgun still clutched in my arms, feeling like I'd only dozed off in brief intervals. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm rectangles on the floor. Birds chirped outside, their cheerful sounds at odds with the dread that still coiled inside me. The sun was out, but it did nothing to chase off the weight tightening my chest. I dragged myself outside to survey the damage, shotgun in hand. The day was bright and clear, the sky a perfect blue without a cloud in sight. It should have been beautiful. Sure enough, another cow was gone. The fencing I'd patched was shredded again, worse than before. Where yesterday's damage had been limited to a small section, now a full 10 feet of fence was destroyed. Splinters littered the ground, and I spotted crimson smears on the wire that looked too fresh to be old stains. There were footprints, too, the kind I had no name for. Long, deformed impressions that seemed part hoof, part something far more disturbing. Some looked almost human, 5 toes splayed wide, while others resembled a deer's print, only larger, deeper, wrong somehow. I knelt down to examine one particularly clear impression. The soil had retained its shape perfectly, allowing me to see details I'd missed yesterday. What I had taken for a hoof print had a thumb-like appendage on one side, as if the creature's feet were caught in some halfway state between animal and human. I forced myself deeper into the pasture, shotgun ready. It felt ridiculous in the bright morning light. Monsters didn't exist, at least not the kind that hid in forests and stole cattle in the night. But every rustle in the grass, every flutter of a bird made me jump, my finger tightening on the trigger guard. The remaining cattle huddled together at the far end of the field, as far from the woods as they could get. They watched me approach with wide, frightened eyes. When I tried to herd them toward the barn for safety, they balked, refusing to move closer to the tree line. The forest stood ominously just beyond the fields, an unspoken invitation for this thing to come and go at will. Dark and dense, it seemed to swallow the sunlight that touched its edges. Despite the daylight, I sensed I wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched crawled up my spine, settling between my shoulder blades like an icy finger. Frustration and anger flared inside me. I'd lived here all my life, and no unknown creature was going to claim this land as a feeding ground. I mustered enough nerve to stand at the tree line, hollering into the undergrowth that I wasn't afraid. "I know you're in there," I shouted, my voice echoing back at me from the silent trees. "This is my land, my home!" "You're not welcome here." My voice shook, and the echo that returned from the stillness was unnerving. For a split second, I thought I saw a black shape slip between the trunks. But whether it was the thing itself or just my imagination, I had no intention of finding out. I half-jogged back to the farmhouse, all the while feeling that same prickling sense of being watched. The weight of unseen eyes followed me across the field, up the porch steps, through the door. Even inside, with locks engaged and curtains drawn, I couldn't shake the feeling of exposure, of vulnerability. I called the local sheriff's office, reporting the missing cattle and the damaged fence. The deputy who answered sounded bored, telling me that cattle rustling wasn't uncommon and promising to send someone out when they had the manpower. I didn't mention the strange tracks or the creature I'd glimpsed. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, playing a prank. I tried calling Mia next, hoping to apologize for our fight, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me back, careful to keep my voice steady, not wanting to alarm her with the fear that still thrummed through my veins. That afternoon, I did everything I could think of to prepare. I scavenged the barn for nails, boards, and tools, then rigged makeshift barricades on the windows. It felt a little excessive, but the memory of those eyes peering at me the night before kept me hammering away. I boarded up the first floor windows, leaving just enough space to peek through or aim a gun if necessary. I dragged the heavy oak table from the dining room to brace against the back door, which had always been flimsy. I stacked furniture against certain doors I never used, bracing them from the inside. The place looked more like a fortress with each passing hour, and I hated that I needed this level of security in my own home. But the alternative, being exposed, vulnerable to whatever stalked the woods, was worse. I inventoried our weapons next. Besides the shotgun, there was my father's hunting rifle and a small revolver he kept locked in the safe. I retrieved all three, along with every box of ammunition I could find. I laid them out on the kitchen counter, checking each one methodically. My phone rang as I was loading the revolver. It was Mia returning my call. I almost didn't answer, unsure of what to say, how to explain what was happening without sounding unhinged. But I needed to hear a friendly voice. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "You sounded weird in your message." I hesitated. "I'm fine. Just dealing with some issues at the farm." "What kind of issues?" "Something's been attacking the cattle," I said, deciding to stick as close to the truth as possible. "Broke through the fence twice now. Took 3 of them. God, that's awful." "What was it? A bear?" I closed my eyes, seeing again the misshapen tracks, the gleaming eyes in the darkness. "I don't know, maybe." There was a pause. "Do you want me to come over?" "I could be there in an hour." "No," I said too quickly. The thought of Mia here, exposed to whatever danger lurked in the woods, made my stomach twist. No, it's fine. I've got it under control. Just wanted to say sorry about yesterday. We talked for a few more minutes, but my attention was divided, my eyes constantly drawn to the windows, the darkening sky outside. When we finally hung up, I felt both relieved and more alone than ever. As dusk crept closer, I patrolled the house again, triple-checking every lock, every barricade. The air outside turned heavy, and the wind rustled the dead leaves near the fence. It carried a faint, sickly smell that made my stomach churn. I couldn't shake the sense that it was out there, sizing me up, waiting for darkness to hide its advance. I found myself glancing repeatedly at the tree line, searching for those twin points of light, that hulking silhouette. With the last of the daylight fading, I made one final trip to the barn, determined to save as many of the animals as possible. I managed to herd most of the cattle into the sturdy structure, securing the heavy doors with chains and padlocks. The horses were already inside, nervously pawing at the ground in their stalls. As I walked back to the house, the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the farm into twilight. Shadows stretched long across the fields, reaching toward me like grasping hands. I quickened my pace, suddenly desperate to be inside, behind locked doors and barricaded windows. I made it to the porch just as full darkness descended. The night air was unnaturally still, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting. I took one last look around before stepping inside, locking and barricading the door behind me. Night finally fell, and with it the usual forest noises vanished. No crickets, no frogs, just an unsettling quiet that set me on edge. My muscles tensed with every step across the old floorboards. I turned off most of the lights, leaving a few dim lamps so I could see if anything moved outside. My shotgun was within arm's reach, and I had the revolver holstered at my hip just in case. I positioned myself in the living room, with a clear view of both the front door and the large picture window that overlooked the yard. From here I could see most of the property, illuminated by the pale light of the moon. A few hours crawled by in suffocating silence. The house creaked and settled around me, each sound making me flinch. My eyes burned from staring into the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd overdone it. That the missing cattle had a mundane explanation. That the tracks belonged to some known animal, distorted by my fear and the poor light. That the shape I'd seen at the tree line was nothing more than a shadow, a trick of the moonlight. That's when a sudden crash rattled the front door. The force behind the blow echoed through the house, making the windows vibrate in their frames. My mouth went dry and my heart thundered in my ears. I raised the shotgun, aiming it at the door, my palms slick with sweat. Another crash. The door frame quaked, and I heard glass pop and skitter across the floor somewhere downstairs. The barricade I'd built shuddered but held firm. Whatever was outside wanted in, and it was strong enough to make solid oak bend. A low roar rose from behind the walls, so feral and strange that I felt the vibrations in my chest. It wasn't a sound any natural animal could make, too deep, too resonant, with an almost human quality that made it all the more terrifying. I backed away from the door, moving deeper into the house. The crashing continued, moving from the front door to the windows. I heard glass shatter in the kitchen, followed by the scrape of something large forcing its way through the opening. Something was forcing its way in, and my body reacted before my brain caught up. I snatched the shotgun and scrambled upstairs, nearly tripping on the last step. In the hallway, I could hear it moving below, heavy footsteps that made the floorboards groan in protest. Each footstep of the intruder felt heavier than any human's. The boards creaked as if under the weight of something colossal. An overpowering stench drifted toward me, thick enough to taste, the reek of decay, of flesh left too long in the sun. I covered my nose with my sleeve, trying not to retch. The smell was so intense it made my eyes water. I backed into my bedroom, closing the door as quietly as possible. My hands shook as I turned the lock, knowing it would offer little protection against whatever had broken into my home. Then came the banging on the door to my room. Loud rhythmic hits that shattered my nerve. It knew exactly where I was. I could hear it breathing on the other side of the door, wet, ragged breaths that sounded more like liquid bubbling than air moving through lungs. Splinters of wood flew as I shouldered the door, shoving a dresser into place to buy a few seconds. The heavy piece of furniture moved reluctantly across the floor, scraping loudly. I positioned it against the door just as something slammed into it from the other side. The door buckled, and I finally caught sight of it. The crack between the door and frame gave me a horrible glimpse. Matted fur, something like a deer's skull topped with twisted antlers, but with patches of rotting skin clinging to it. The antlers were wrong. Too many points, growing in impossible directions, some curling back toward the skull. But it was the eyes that froze me in place. They weren't in the skull where they should be, but lower, embedded in the decaying flesh of what might have been a neck. They glowed with a sickly yellow light, pupilless and fixed directly on me. My hand shook as I racked the shotgun's first shell. I aimed at the gap in the door, my finger tightening on the trigger. The creature slammed into the door again, splintering the wood. The dresser slid back several inches, its legs leaving deep gouges in the hardwood floor. I fired. The muzzle flash lit up the creature's hideous features. Empty eyes set in decaying sockets, an open maw with a jaw that seemed off-kilter, lined with teeth too numerous and too sharp to belong to any deer. The shot caught it in what passed for its chest. It let out a horrible screech that made me recoil, then lunged with renewed fury. The door burst open, sending shards of wood everywhere, the dresser toppling backward. The thing stood fully revealed now, its form defying comprehension. It walked on two legs, but they bent at odd angles, ending in split hooves that had partially morphed into something like human feet. Its arms were too long, hanging almost to the floor, tipped with curved claws that looked capable of tearing through flesh with ease. Its torso was a nightmare of exposed bone and rotting meat, ribs jutting through patchy fur. And the smell. God, the smell was overwhelming, like standing in the middle of a mass grave in the height of summer. I fired again, the recoil slamming back into my shoulder, but I refused to let go. The thing staggered, leaking a dark, foul substance that smelled like death. It howled, flailing those long limbs in fury. I kept my finger on the trigger, racking another shell, firing, and doing it again until I was spent. Each shot was deafening, and the house trembled with every roar from that abomination. The creature's movements became erratic. It slammed into walls, leaving smears of that black ichor wherever it touched. It seemed confused, disoriented by the assault. I used the moment to reload, my fingers fumbling with the shells. Finally, it staggered backward, wheeling around in confusion. It tore down part of the hallway as it fled, smashing through walls and overturning furniture in its escape. I grabbed my pistol, sprinting after it down the stairs, driven by a mix of terror and rage. My heart hammered, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The front door, the very one it had battered in, now stood ripped off its hinges. Outside, the shape lumbered across the yard. Its outline was monstrous, lit by a flickering porch light. With a trembling grip, I squeezed off a few rounds. The bullet seemed to do little more than anger it further. It whipped its head back, unleashing a final roar that reverberated off the barn, then bounded into the forest shadows. I wanted to chase it, to finish it off, to ensure it never returned. But the rational side of me knew that was suicide. I stood on the porch, watching it disappear between the looming trees, its form blending with the darkness until it was gone. I called out a string of curses, equal parts terrified and furious, watching it vanish between the looming trees. Then there was sudden silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. Even the wind had died, leaving the yard unnaturally still. My front door was on the ground, the hinges twisted beyond repair. Inside, I discovered the windows, where I swore I'd heard glass explode, were strangely intact, as if reality had split for a moment, and then stitched itself back together, leaving evidence only in the wrecked wood and bullet casings scattered at my feet. I leaned against the splintered frame, shotgun and pistol hanging limply in my hands, trying to piece everything together. What had just happened? What was that thing? And most importantly, would it come back? I stayed that way for what felt like hours, until I realized I had to come up with a believable story for my parents. There was no way to explain giant claw marks or bullet holes that made any sense. I finally decided to say I'd lost my temper during a personal crisis, blowing holes in the door myself. A story that wouldn't earn me any points, but at least it wouldn't brand me a lunatic. The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. I swept up broken glass, nailed plywood over the gaping hole where the front door had been, and tried to clean the black ichor that stained the floors and walls. It resisted my efforts, seeming to cling to the surfaces it touched, leaving permanent marks like acid burns. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, not with the memory of that thing so fresh in my mind. Instead, I sat on the porch until dawn, weapons at the ready, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. Morning came with surprising normalcy. Birds sang in the trees, sunlight dappled the yard, and a gentle breeze stirred the grass. It was hard to reconcile the peaceful scene before me with the horror of the previous night. I forced myself to inspect the property in daylight. The barn was untouched, the animals inside unharmed. But the yard told a different story. Deep gouges marred the earth where the creature had fled, leading in a straight line toward the forest. I followed them to the edge of the trees, but no further. I couldn't bring myself to enter those woods again. The black substance it had leaked was still visible, glistening wetly in the morning sun despite the hours that had passed. When I touched it with a stick, the wood sizzled and smoked, confirming my suspicion that it was corrosive. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, but the house and yard were eerily calm. Stains on the floor had vanished where I'd cleaned, though the gouges remained. The only real reminder of the battle was my ruined door and the crippling weight in my chest. The phone rang soon after, my folks checking up on me. I lied as smoothly as I could about the door, blaming it on a fit of anger over my fight with Mia. I promised to fix it before they got home. They threatened to ground me for the rest of my life, but that was a relief compared to explaining the truth. The next few days passed without incident. No more cattle disappeared, no more strange lights appeared at the edge of the woods. But the uneasy feeling never left me. I slept in short bursts, always with a weapon close at hand. I avoided the forest entirely, taking the long way around to reach the fields on the other side. When my parents returned, they were furious about the door and the holes in the walls, but their anger was nothing compared to the terror I'd felt. I accepted their punishment without complaint, relieved that they were home, that I wasn't alone anymore. I never told them what had happened. How could I? They'd think I was crazy or on drugs, so I kept it to myself, carrying the weight of that night alone. The summer passed and fall arrived. The incident began to feel distant, dreamlike. I started to wonder if I'd imagined it all, the eyes in the darkness, the creature in my bedroom. Maybe I'd had some kind of breakdown, conjured a monster from my own fear and isolation. But then I'd catch a glimpse of those black stains on the hallway wall, resistant to paint and bleach alike. Or I'd hear something moving in the woods at night, something too large to be a deer, too deliberate to be a bear, and I'd know it was real, all of it. Time marched on, and I eventually left for college, grateful for the distance from the farm and the woods that surrounded it. My dorm room in the city felt safe, surrounded by concrete and streetlights, far from the darkness of those trees. But every so often I'd check in with my family, ask if the cows were all accounted for, if the fences were intact, if they'd heard any strange howls in the night. They'd brush it off as me worrying too much, but they didn't know the whole story. 3 years passed. I was home for winter break, the farm blanketed in snow. The woods looked different in winter, stark, skeletal, less threatening somehow. I'd almost convinced myself that what happened that summer was some kind of hallucination, a product of stress and isolation. Until the night I heard it again. That low, guttural growl that had haunted my dreams for years. I was alone in the house, my parents at a neighbor's Christmas party. The sound came from outside, somewhere near the barn. My old fear returned in an instant, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. I reached for the shotgun I knew was still in the closet, checking that it was loaded with trembling hands. I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The yard was illuminated by the security light my father had installed, casting everything in a harsh white glow. At first I saw nothing unusual, then movement caught my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the tree line, moving with that same odd, loping gait toward the barn. It was back, or maybe it had never left, simply biding its time, waiting for me to return. I had a choice to make. I could stay inside, barricade the doors like before, hope it left without causing damage. Or I could confront it, finish what had started 3 years ago. The decision was made for me when I heard the horses scream in terror. Their panicked whinnies cut through the night, spurring me into action. I couldn't let it hurt them. I pulled on my boots and coat, grabbed the shotgun, and stepped out into the cold night air. Snow crunched beneath my feet as I moved toward the barn, each breath visible in the frigid air. The security light cast my shadow long before me, a dark shape stretching across the pristine white ground. The barn door stood open, swinging gently in the breeze. I hadn't left it that way. Something had forced it open, breaking the heavy padlock my father used to secure it. The metal lay twisted in the snow, bent as if it were made of soft clay. I raised the shotgun, moving cautiously toward the opening. The horses' frightened noises had stopped, replaced by an unnatural silence that set my teeth on edge. I could smell it, that same putrid stench that had filled my bedroom 3 years ago. "I know you're in there," I called, my voice steadier than I felt. "Come out and face me." No response, just that heavy, waiting silence. I took another step forward, my finger tightening on the trigger. The barn's interior was dark, the shadows deep and impenetrable. Then I saw them, those eyes, glowing with that same sickly yellow light. They were higher this time, as if the creature had grown. They fixed on me with an intelligence that was unmistakable, calculating, almost human. It emerged from the darkness slowly, deliberately. It had changed. Where before it had seemed cobbled together, a mishmash of deer and human parts, now it moved with a terrible grace, its form more defined, more purposeful. The antlers had grown, spreading outward in a crown of bone that scraped the top of the barn door. Its body was larger, the muscle more pronounced beneath the patchy fur. But the face was the same, that deer skull with rotting flesh clinging to it, those eyes burning from what should have been its neck. It stood there, regarding me with what felt like recognition. Did it remember me? Remember the wounds I'd inflicted? I raised the shotgun higher, aiming for those glowing eyes. "Get off my land," I said, my voice low and threatening. "You don't belong here." The creature tilted its head, an unsettlingly human gesture that made my skin crawl. Then it made a sound, not a growl or roar, but something closer to laughter, a wet, gurgling noise that echoed through the barn. It took a step forward, its misshapen feet leaving steaming prints in the snow. Another step, then another. Each movement deliberate, testing me, challenging me. I fired. The shot echoed across the silent farm, louder somehow in the winter air. The creature jerked as the buckshot tore into its shoulder. That black ichor sprang from the wound. But it didn't fall. It didn't even slow down. Instead, it charged. I barely had time to rack another shell before it was on me, those impossibly long arms reaching out. I fired again, point blank into what passed for its chest. The impact knocked it back a step, giving me just enough time to turn and run. My boots slipped in the snow as I sprinted toward the house, the creature's rasping breath close behind me. I could feel its presence at my back, a wall of fetid air and malevolent intent. The distance to the porch seemed impossible, stretching out before me like a nightmare. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. It was gaining on me, moving with that strange bounding gait that ate up the ground between us. Its mouth was open, revealing row upon row of needle-like teeth, glistening wetly in the security light. I made it to the porch steps, taking them 2 at a time. My hand fumbled with the doorknob, slick with sweat despite the cold. The door swung open and I threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. I heard the thud as the creature slammed into the door, making the whole frame shudder. The lock wouldn't hold it for long. I'd seen what it could do to solid oak. I needed a plan, a weapon, anything. My eyes fell on the cabinet where my father kept his hunting gear. Inside was his deer rifle, a .30-06 with more stopping power than my shotgun. I grabbed it, checking that it was loaded, then positioned myself at the living room window with a clear view of the porch. The creature was there, pacing back and forth, its movements jerky and agitated. It paused, raising its antlered head to sniff the air. Then it turned those burning eyes directly to where I stood, as if it could see through walls, through darkness, straight into me. I raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at its chest. My finger tightened on the trigger. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The creature staggered backward, black fluid erupting from a hole in its chest. It howled, a sound of rage and pain that made the windows rattle. I worked the bolt, chambering another round, and fired again. This time, the shot caught it in the head, just below one of those glowing eyes. The impact spun it halfway around, sending it crashing into the porch railing. It lay there, twitching, that black ichor pooling beneath it. I watched, hardly daring to breathe, as the movement slowed and then stopped. The yellow light in its eyes flickered like dying bulbs, then went dark. For several long minutes I stood frozen at the window, rifle still raised, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. The only movement was the slow spread of black fluid across the white snow, eating through it like acid, revealing the dark earth beneath. I should have felt relief. Instead, a new kind of dread settled over me. What if there were more? What if this was just one of many? The forest suddenly seemed vast and full of hidden threats, creatures waiting in the darkness, watching. When my parents returned home hours later, they found me still standing at the window, rifle in hand. The porch was empty. No creature, no black ichor, not even footprints in the snow. Just pristine whiteness, unmarked and innocent. They thought I was having some kind of episode triggered by being home again. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't know what lurked in the woods. Spring came early that year. I should have been back at college, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not when I knew it was still out there. The creature I'd shot on the porch had vanished without a trace, but I knew that didn't mean it was gone for good. My parents worried about me. They spoke in hushed tones when they thought I couldn't hear, using words like counseling and break from school. They didn't understand why I insisted on patrolling the property each night, why I kept weapons close at hand, why I never set foot in the forest. I tried to explain once, to tell them about that summer night 3 years ago, about the creature that had broken into our home. They listened with concerned expressions, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. They didn't believe me. No one did, except Mia. When she came to visit that spring, I finally told her everything. I expected disbelief, maybe even laughter. Instead, she listened quietly, her face growing more serious with each detail. "I believe you," she said when I finished. "You do?" She nodded, her eyes troubled. "My grandfather used to tell stories about something in these woods. Something that wasn't natural. The old-timers called it the Wendigo." The name sent a chill through me. "What's a Wendigo?" "In the old stories, it's a spirit that possesses humans who've committed certain sins, like cannibalism. It transforms them into monsters, trapped between human and beast." She hesitated. "Grandpa said they were immortal, that they could only be killed by fire." Fire. The one thing I hadn't tried. That night, Mia stayed over. We sat on the porch watching the tree line as darkness fell. The spring air was warm, fragrant with new growth and possibility. But my attention was fixed on the shadows between the trees, searching for any sign of movement. "Do you really think it's still out there?" Mia asked, her voice hushed. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the forest. "I know it is. I can feel it watching us. What are you going to do?" I'd been asking myself the same question for months. Running wasn't an option. It would just follow me, or worse, turn its attention to my family in my absence. Hiding was temporary at best. There was only one solution. "I'm going to hunt it down," I said. "End this once and for all." Mia's hand found mine in the darkness. "Not alone, you're not." We spent the next week preparing. I showed Mia how to use the shotgun, the rifle, the revolver. We gathered supplies, flashlights, knives, first aid kits. And we made Molotov cocktails, glass bottles filled with gasoline, rags stuffed in the necks as wicks. My parents thought we were crazy, heading into the woods at night with weapons and homemade incendiaries. They tried to stop us, threatened to call the sheriff. But in the end, they let us go, perhaps hoping that finding nothing would finally cure me of my obsession. We set out at dusk, the light fading rapidly as we entered the forest. The familiar paths seemed even more sinister now, the trees looming overhead like silent watchers. Mia walked close beside me, her shotgun ready, eyes scanning the darkening woods. "Where are we going?" she whispered. I pointed deeper into the forest. "There's an old hunting cabin about 2 miles in. My grandfather used to use it. If anything lives in these woods, it would know about that cabin." We moved as quietly as possible, pausing often to listen for any sound out of place. The forest was alive with normal nighttime noises. Crickets chirping, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl. But nothing unusual. nothing to suggest we weren't alone. The cabin appeared ahead, a dark shape against the night sky. It was small, little more than a shack really, with one room and a tiny porch. The door hung crooked on its hinges, the windows dark and empty. "Wait here," I told Mia, stepping forward to check the cabin. The door creaked as I pushed it open, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside. The cabin was empty, dust covering the single table and chair, the narrow cot against one wall. No one had been here in years, or so it seemed at first glance. Then my light caught something on the floor. Tracks pressed into the dust. Not human footprints, not animal tracks, but those same hybrid shapes I'd seen at the fence line. And they were fresh. I backed out of the cabin slowly, keeping my light trained on the doorway. "It's been here," I whispered to Mia. "Recently." Her face paled in the moonlight. "What do we do?" Before I could answer, a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness behind us. We both whirled around, weapons raised. Nothing moved among the trees, but the night had gone suddenly, deathly quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no animal sounds at all. Just that heavy, waiting silence I'd come to associate with the creature's presence. "It's here," I breathed, barely audible even to myself. As if in response, a low growl emerged from the darkness to our right. We turned toward the sound, and there they were, those yellow eyes, floating in the blackness between the trees. "Don't move," I whispered to Mia. "Let it come to us." The creature stepped forward, moving into a patch of moonlight. It was even more horrifying than I remembered. The antlers had continued to grow, branching and twisting into an impossible crown. Its body was larger, more muscular, the decay seemingly halted or reversed. And its face, that deer skull with rotting flesh, had changed, becoming more expressive, more human somehow. It regarded us with what looked like curiosity, those burning eyes moving from me to Mia and back again. It showed no fear, no hesitation, just that terrible, patient intelligence. "Now," I said, loud enough for Mia to hear. We fired together, the shotgun and rifle roaring in unison. The creature jerked as the bullets struck, black ichor spraying from its chest and shoulder. But it didn't fall. Instead, it charged, moving with shocking speed for something so large. I dropped the rifle, grabbing one of the Molotov cocktails from my backpack. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lighter, trying to ignite the rag wick. The creature was closing fast, those terrible claws extended. The wick caught just as it reached us. I hurled the bottle with all my strength, watching it arc through the air and smash against the creature's chest. Flames erupted instantly, engulfing its upper body in a sheet of fire. The creature's scream was like nothing I'd ever heard, a high, piercing wail that seemed to contain centuries of rage and pain. It thrashed wildly, trying to extinguish the flames, but the fire spread rapidly, consuming fur and flesh alike. Mia and I backed away, watching in horror and fascination as the creature burned. The smell was unbearable, a mix of gasoline, charred meat, and something older, more putrid. The yellow light in its eyes flickered, dimmed, then flared brighter than before, like twin stars going supernova. Then, with one final earth-shaking roar, it collapsed to the ground, still burning. The flames illuminated the clearing, casting long, dancing shadows among the trees. We stood there watching as the fire consumed what remained of the creature, reducing it to ash and bone. When it was over, when the last flames had died down, leaving only smoldering remains, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was done. The nightmare that had haunted me for years was finally over. Mia's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "Is it really dead?" I nodded, staring at the blackened shape on the forest floor. "It has to be." We didn't linger. The fire had attracted attention. We could hear voices in the distance, see flashlight beams moving through the trees. The local fire department probably, responding to reports of smoke in the forest. We slipped away, taking a different path back to the farm. Neither of us spoke until we were clear of the woods, the open fields spreading before us under the moonlight. "What do we tell people?" Mia asked as we walked. I shook my head. "Nothing. No one would believe us anyway." She didn't argue. She knew as well as I did that some truths are better kept hidden, some experiences too strange to share. We reached the farmhouse just before dawn, exhausted but alive. My parents were waiting, worry etched on their faces. They asked questions we couldn't answer, made demands we couldn't meet. In the end, we told them what they wanted to hear, that we'd found nothing, that the woods were empty, that my fears were unfounded. It was easier that way. For them, at least. In the weeks that followed, life returned to something resembling normal. I went back to college, throwing myself into my studies with newfound focus. Mia and I grew closer, bound by the secret we shared. And if sometimes I woke in the night, heart racing, convinced I could hear that low, guttural growl outside my window, well, that was to be expected. Some fears don't die easily. Years have passed since that night in the forest. I've graduated, started a career, moved to a city far from those woods, but I still check in with my family regularly. Ask if all the cattle are accounted for, if the fences are intact, if they've heard any strange sounds in the night. They brush it off as me worrying too much. But they don't know the whole story. They don't know what I know, that some things refuse to stay dead, that some nightmares find ways to return. Part of me stayed convinced that whatever I fought off that night is still out there, licking its wounds, waiting. And the thought of going back to that farm alone still manages to send a sharp bolt of dread through my gut every time. Because deep down, I know the truth. The forest keeps its secrets, and sometimes in the darkest part of the night, those secrets find ways to break free. I always thought moving to the cabin would be peaceful. You know, the quiet where the loudest thing is the wind in the trees and the occasional crackle of a fire. Iris loved it here. She said the woods felt alive, like they were watching over us. I used to laugh that off, but after what happened, I'm not so sure anymore. The ridge loomed behind the cabin like a wall, the trees stretched thin and tall against the sky. It was May when we first moved in, a decision made after months of city life had worn us down. The real estate agent had called it a rustic retreat, which was a polite way of saying the plumbing was questionable and the electrical wiring looked like it had been installed during the Nixon administration. But there was something about the place that pulled at us. Maybe it was the way morning light filtered through the pines, or how the creek behind the property gurgled like quiet conversation. "This is it," Iris had said, her fingers intertwining with mine as we stood on the porch that first day. "This is where we start over." I believed her then. I wanted to believe her. After everything we'd been through, the miscarriage, the grief counseling, the nights I'd find her staring blankly at nothing, I would have believed anything that put that spark back in her eyes. The cabin itself was simple. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with ancient appliances, a living room with a stone fireplace that dominated the north wall. The previous owner had left behind furniture that smelled faintly of mothballs and cigarettes, but Iris said it added character. She spent those first weeks cleaning and arranging, hanging up the tapestries she'd collected over years of thrift store hunting. I focused on the practical things, fixing the loose boards on the porch, patching the roof where it leaked, making sure the well pump worked properly. During the day, it was beautiful. Sunlight dappled the forest floor, wildflowers dotted the clearing, and birds called to each other from the trees. But at night, everything changed. The woods took on a different quality after sunset. The shadows deepened, stretched, seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. The wind made the branches scrape against the roof like fingernails. And the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, that makes every small sound amplified to startling proportions. It was too still, too quiet. I'd chalked it up to my imagination, at least until that night on the porch. We were sitting outside, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. Iris was leaning against me, her face lit by the faint glow of the lantern beside us. She was humming softly, something she'd heard growing up, when she stopped mid-note and stiffened. "Do you see that?" she whispered, barely audible. "See what?" I asked, already feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise. She pointed toward the ridge. At first I didn't see anything, just the black outline of trees against the sky. But then it moved, a flash of pale, almost white, slinking low to the ground. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. A deer, maybe? But it wasn't. It was too thin, its limbs too long, its movements all wrong. It crawled forward on all fours, its head jerking unnaturally like it was struggling to balance itself. For a second it stopped and turned toward us. I froze. I couldn't see its face, but I swear it was looking at me. "It's just an animal," I muttered, trying to convince myself as much as Iris. She shook her head. "No, it's not." Her voice didn't sound like her, calm, almost reverent. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on the thing as it crawled into the shadows and disappeared. I wanted to get up, grab the flashlight and chase after it, but my legs wouldn't move. "Maybe it's a coyote," I suggested. My voice unsteady. Iris smiled faintly, her eyes still fixed on the ridge. "No," she said, "it's something else." I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made me jump. Iris, though, seemed perfectly at ease. She even laughed at me when I told her I'd heard something outside. "Maybe it's your forest spirit," I said, trying to make light of it. She just smiled. "Maybe it is." The next morning, I went out to check the property. The air was crisp, the ground damp from the rain the night before. Everything looked normal until I got to the edge of the clearing. Then I found something disturbing. A circle of broken branches, scattered as if something had been lying there. In the center was a pile of bones, small ones picked clean. I knelt down, my stomach twisting. They looked like rabbit bones, but there was something off about the way they were arranged, almost like a spiral. I brought Iris out to see it. She didn't seem fazed. "It's a gift," she said simply. "A gift? From what?" She shrugged, her gaze drifting toward the ridge. "The forest." I laughed nervously, but she didn't. She just stood there staring, until I finally dragged her back inside. As days passed, I tried to convince myself that what we'd seen was just a sick animal, maybe a starving coyote or a feral dog. But deep down, I knew better. The way it moved wasn't natural. The way it looked at us wasn't animal curiosity. There was intelligence there. Purpose. I found myself checking the locks twice before bed, pulling the curtains tight, keeping a hunting knife in the bedside drawer. Iris noticed but didn't comment. Instead, she seemed to grow more comfortable with the woods, spending hours sitting on the porch steps or walking along the tree line, collecting pine cones and interesting rocks. "Don't go too far," I'd call after her, trying to keep the worry from my voice. "I won't," she'd reply, but her eyes would drift toward the ridge, like she was looking for something, or waiting for it. I started documenting the strange things. A journal seemed too formal, so I used my phone, taking pictures of anything unusual, more bone arrangements, disturbed soil, claw marks on trees that were too high for any normal animal. I told myself it was to keep track, to look for patterns, but really, I think I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge, casting long shadows across the clearing, I found Iris at the kitchen table, arranging twigs and leaves into complex patterns. "What are you doing?" I asked, setting down the groceries I'd brought back from town. "Making something," she said vaguely, not looking up. I peered over her shoulder. The twigs formed an intricate web with small stones placed at intersections. It reminded me uncomfortably of the bone spiral I'd found. "Where did you learn to do that?" She paused, her fingers hovering over her creation. "I didn't, it just came to me." "Iris, don't you think—" "Don't," she cut me off, her voice suddenly sharp. "Don't ruin this for me." "Ruin what?" She didn't answer, just gathered up her creation and walked outside. Through the window, I watched her place it carefully at the edge of the clearing, arranging it just so before walking back to the house. That night, the thing came closer. We were inside, the fire crackling low, when Iris suddenly got up and went to the window. "What is it?" I asked, already dreading the answer. She didn't reply at first, just pressed her hand against the glass. Finally, she said, "It's here." My chest tightened. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The air was freezing, my breath coming out in clouds, and there it was. It stood at the edge of the clearing, upright now, its pale body stretched and gaunt. Its limbs were too long, its hands dangling near its knees. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there watching me. I shined the flashlight on it, and it flinched, its head snapping to the side like it was trying to avoid the light. Then it dropped to all fours and skittered back into the woods, disappearing into the dark. When I turned back to the house, Iris was still at the window, smiling. "It doesn't want to hurt us," she said, her voice soft. "It just wants to watch." That was the first time I felt truly afraid, not of the thing, but of her. It started with Iris spending more time on the porch. She'd always liked being outside, but this was different. She wasn't enjoying the fresh air or taking in the scenery. She was watching, waiting. Every morning she'd step outside, barefoot, no matter how cold it was, and stare toward the ridge. At first I told myself it was harmless. Iris had always been a little more connected to the natural world than me. And if she wanted to commune with the trees, who was I to stop her? But then she started talking about it. I see it every day now, she told me one afternoon while I was stacking firewood. She was sitting cross-legged on the porch, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes locked on the tree line. I stopped mid-swing. You see what? The Watcher, she said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. It comes closer every time. I set the axe down, my stomach tightening. Iris, this isn't funny. She turned to me, her face calm, serene even. I'm not joking. It doesn't want to hurt us. It's curious, that's all. Curious, sure, because that's exactly how I'd describe something that crawls on all fours like a broken marionette. I began to notice other changes in her. She stopped wearing her silver necklace, the one her grandmother had given her, the one she'd never taken off in the 5 years I'd known her. When I asked about it, she shrugged and said it felt wrong now. She started eating less, sleeping more during the day, and staying awake at night. Sometimes I'd wake at 3 in the morning to find her side of the bed empty, only to discover her sitting on the porch steps, staring into the darkness. Come back to bed, I'd plead, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. In a minute, she'd say, but she wouldn't move, wouldn't even acknowledge me beyond that. I started researching, spending hours at the town library while Iris stayed at the cabin. The locals were tight-lipped about the woods, but the historical records told their own story. 3 disappearances in the last 50 years, all hikers who'd wandered off the main trails. A series of abandoned homesteads along the ridge, families who'd moved in with hope and left within months, their reasons unrecorded. One afternoon, I cornered Mr. Winters at the general store. He'd lived in the area his whole life, knew every inch of those woods. That ridge, I said casually, bagging the groceries he'd rung up. Any strange stories about it? His weathered face went still. Why do you ask? Just curious. My girlfriend and I, we've been seeing wildlife. Unusual wildlife. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward. Listen to me carefully, young man. Those woods are old, older than this town, older than any of us can understand. There are things in there that don't have names. Things that were here long before us and will be here long after. What kind of things? My mouth had gone dry. He shook his head. The kind you don't want to attract attention from. The kind that notice when you notice them. He pushed my groceries toward me. My advice? Sell that cabin. Move back to wherever you came from. And don't look for things in the dark. You might find them. I drove home with his words echoing in my head, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. When I pulled up to the cabin, Iris was standing at the edge of the clearing, looking toward the ridge. As I got out of the car, she turned to me, and for a second I didn't recognize her. Her face was the same, but her eyes, they looked hollow, distant, like she was seeing something I couldn't. He's coming tonight, she said. I didn't ask who. That night I woke up to find Iris's side of the bed empty. At first I thought she'd gone to the bathroom or maybe downstairs for a drink of water. But when I didn't hear any movement, I got up to check. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. The door to the porch was wide open, letting in a freezing draft. My heart dropped. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The moon was high, casting long shadows over the clearing. Iris, I called, my voice shaky. No answer. I followed the faint tracks in the snow, my breath coming out in short panicked bursts. They led toward the woods. Iris! I shouted again, louder this time. Finally, I saw her. She was standing just inside the tree line, her back to me, staring at something I couldn't see. Iris! I yelled, running to her. What the hell are you doing? She didn't turn around. Her breath fogged in the cold air, slow and steady, like she wasn't freezing in nothing but a sweater and pajama pants. Do you hear it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I grabbed her arm and spun her around. Hear what? What are you talking about? She smiled faintly, her eyes distant. It's singing. The hairs on my neck stood up. An icy feeling spread through my chest, freezing me from the inside out. We're going inside, I said, pulling her back toward the cabin. She didn't resist, but as we walked, she kept glancing over her shoulder, like she was leaving something important behind. Back in the cabin, I sat her down on the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Her skin was ice cold, but she wasn't shivering. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the dark woods beyond. Iris, look at me, I said, kneeling in front of her. What's happening to you? She finally focused on my face, and for a moment, I saw clarity there, saw the woman I'd fallen in love with. Fear flickered in her eyes, and she grabbed my hands. I can't stop thinking about it, she whispered urgently. I see it when I close my eyes. I hear it calling me. What does it want? She shook her head. I don't know. But it's so lonely, so hungry. Hungry for what? Her eyes darted to the window again. For connection. For understanding. She squeezed my hands tighter. Help me. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her trembling now. I will. We'll leave tomorrow. Go back to the city, get you some help. She nodded against my shoulder, but when I pulled back to look at her, that distant look had returned to her eyes. Whatever moment of clarity she'd had was gone. The next day, she acted like nothing had happened. She hummed to herself while making breakfast, joked about how I needed to chop wood faster, and didn't mention the previous night at all. Something was wrong. That afternoon, while she was outside, I found something near the edge of the clearing. A bundle of sticks tied together with twine, sitting on top of a patch of disturbed snow. At first, I thought it was just some weird debris, but then I noticed the hair tangled in the twine. Long, dark strands that looked exactly like Iris's. I showed it to her when she came back inside. Do you know anything about this? I asked, holding it up. Her eyes lit up and she reached for it. It's a gift, she said, cradling it like it was something precious. A gift from what? I demanded. She shrugged, still smiling. The forest. I took it outside and burned it. Iris watched me from the porch, her face expressionless. When night fell, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I even pushed the heavy oak dresser in front of the bedroom door. Iris watched me with amusement. You can't keep it out, she said softly as we got into bed. It's already in. I pretended not to hear her, but sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, listening to Iris's breathing beside me, wondering if I'd wake up to find her gone again. But she stayed, though her sleep was restless, her body twitching, small whimpers escaping her lips. Around 3 a.m, I heard it. A scraping sound, like nails dragging across the outer wall of the cabin. Slow, deliberate. I sat up, heart pounding. Iris was still asleep, her face peaceful now, as if the sound had somehow soothed her. The scraping continued, circling the cabin. I reached for the hunting knife in the drawer, gripping it tightly as I slipped out of bed. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I moved toward the window, parting the curtains just enough to peer out. The night was clear, moonlight illuminating the clearing. And there, at the edge of the woods, stood the thing. It was watching the cabin, its head tilted at that unnatural angle. As I stared, it took a step forward, then another, its movements jerky and wrong, like a puppet with half its strings cut. I backed away from the window, knife clutched to my chest. The scraping had stopped, but now I heard something worse, the soft creak of the porch steps, the slight rattle of the doorknob. It was trying to get in. I glanced at Iris, still sleeping soundly. Should I wake her? What if she tried to let it in? The doorknob stopped rattling. Silence fell again, heavy and oppressive. I waited, counting my heartbeats, straining to hear any sound of movement. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, exhaustion overtook me and I crawled back into bed, the knife still in my hand. I didn't sleep, just lay there watching Iris, watching the door, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. When dawn broke, I was still awake. Iris stirred beside me, stretching like a cat, a small smile on her lips. You look terrible, she said, touching my face. Bad dreams. I looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of the Iris I knew. We need to leave, I said. Today. Her smile faltered. I can't leave. Why not? She looked toward the window, toward the ridge. It wouldn't like that. The breaking point came 3 nights later. I woke up to the sound of something moving on the roof. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I lay there holding my breath, straining to listen. Then I realized Iris wasn't beside me. I bolted upright and looked around. The curtains were open, and through the window I saw her. She was standing in the clearing, looking up at the ridge. I threw on my boots and coat, grabbing the flashlight as I stumbled out the door. The cold hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. "Iris!" I yelled, running toward her. She didn't move. When I reached her, I grabbed her shoulders and spun her around. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, like she was in a trance. "What are you doing?" I shouted. She didn't answer. She just pointed toward the ridge. I followed her gaze, and there it was. The thing stood at the edge of the forest, half hidden in the shadows. It was taller now, its limbs impossibly long, its face a pale, featureless void. It tilted its head as if studying us, and then stepped forward, its movements jerky and wrong. I dragged Iris back to the cabin, my heart pounding. She didn't fight me, didn't say a word, just kept looking over her shoulder at the thing. When we got inside, I locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle. Iris sat at the table, staring out the window with a faint smile on her face. "It doesn't want to hurt us," she said softly. I paced the floor, running my hands through my hair. "This is insane, Iris. That thing isn't natural. It's not some forest spirit. It's something else. Something wrong." She looked at me, her eyes clearer than they had been in days. "I know what it is." "What?" "It's lonely." I stared at her. "Lonely? That thing isn't human, Iris. It's not even an animal. It was a man once," she interrupted. "A long time ago. But the forest changed him." My skin crawled. "How do you know that?" "It told me. In my dreams." She looked back out the window. "It's been alone for so long, watching people come and go. It just wants company." "So it's what? Trying to take you? Turn you into whatever it is?" She shook her head. "Not take. Share. It wants to show me things." I knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in mine. "Listen to me, Iris. We're leaving tomorrow. First light. I don't care what we have to leave behind. We're getting out of here." She pulled her hands away. "I'm not going anywhere." "Yes, you are. Even if I have to drag you." Her eyes hardened. "You don't understand. I've never felt so connected to anything in my life. After we lost the baby, I was so empty, so numb. But now..." She pressed her hand to her chest. "Now I feel something again. It's filling all the empty spaces inside me." I felt sick. "That's not healing, Iris. That's something feeding on your grief." She stood up abruptly. "I'm going to bed. Don't follow me." I watched her walk away, feeling like I was losing her with every step. Maybe I already had. I didn't think it could get worse. Every night since that last encounter, I'd stayed up late, sitting by the window with the shotgun across my lap. Iris barely spoke to me anymore, her eyes always drifting toward the ridge, her face drawn and pale. She claimed she hadn't seen the thing again, but I knew she was lying. She flinched at every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the windows. But the worst part was how quiet the forest had become. No birds, no rustling of animals, just silence. It was like the woods were holding their breath, waiting. I tried calling for help. Iris's sister, her friends from the city, even a local doctor. But the phone lines went dead the day after I found the stick bundle, and cell service had always been spotty at best. We were isolated, cut off, exactly how the thing wanted us. I began making preparations to leave, packing essentials, loading them into the truck when Iris wasn't watching. I found her journal, filled with drawings of the thing, pages of writing in what looked like a language I'd never seen before. The last coherent entry read, "It's calling me to the ridge. I have to go. I have to see what's on the other side." The day before I planned to take her away, I woke to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me. "It's coming tonight," she said, her voice flat. "The storm will bring it." I looked out the window. The sky was clear blue, Not a cloud in sight. "There's no storm coming, Iris." She smiled, a strange, secretive smile. "You'll see." That night the storm hit. The wind howled, rain pelting against the cabin like 1,000 tiny claws. The power flickered and then died completely, plunging us into darkness. I lit a lantern and tried to keep calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Iris had gone to bed early, or at least that's what she'd told me. I hadn't checked. I didn't want to see the vacant, glassy look in her eyes again. I sat in the living room, the shotgun propped against my knee. When I heard it, the faint creak of footsteps overhead, my stomach twisted. I told myself it was just the wind, that the old roof was groaning under the pressure of the storm. But then it came again, louder this time, deliberate. Something was up there. I stood, gripping the shotgun, my heart pounding. "Iris?" I called out, my voice cracking. No answer. I moved toward the bedroom, the lantern casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The door was slightly ajar, and when I pushed it open, my heart sank. The bed was empty. The curtains were drawn back, and the window was wide open, rain soaking the floorboards. "Iris!" I shouted, running to the window. Outside, the storm raged. But through the sheets of rain, I saw her. She was standing in the clearing, her arms stretched upward, her face tilted to the sky, and it was there. The thing loomed over her, taller than I'd ever seen it. Its pale, emaciated body was bent at impossible angles, its limbs trembling as if struggling to hold their weight. Its face, or lack of one, was turned toward her, a gaping black void where its eyes should have been. I yelled her name again, but she didn't react. She was whispering something, her voice carried away by the wind. I didn't think. I just ran. The rain soaked me to the bone as I sprinted across the clearing, the shotgun heavy in my hands. The thing didn't move as I approached, didn't even acknowledge me. Its entire focus was on Iris. When I was just a few feet away, I raised the shotgun and fired. The sound was deafening, cutting through the storm like a thunderclap. The thing jerked back, its body folding in on itself like a collapsing puppet. For a moment I thought I'd killed it, but then it straightened, its head snapping toward me with a sickening crack. It turned its face, half-decayed flesh stretched over bone, eyes sunk deep into hollow sockets, its mouth a jagged tear in what had once been human features. Then it reached for Iris. "No!" I screamed, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. The thing let out a sound, a deep, guttural noise that vibrated in my chest. Its arm stretched toward us, impossibly long, its clawed fingers brushing the edge of my jacket. I fired again, this time aiming for its head. The shot hit, and the thing recoiled, its body convulsing. It let out another sound, this one high-pitched and grating, like metal scraping against metal. Then it retreated, skittering backward into the woods, its limbs twisting and contorting as it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I threw Iris over my shoulder and ran for the cabin. When we got inside, I locked the door and barricaded it with everything I could find. Chairs, the table, even the couch. Iris didn't fight me. She just sat on the floor, dripping wet, staring at nothing. "What the hell were you doing out there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She didn't answer. "Iris!" I shouted, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "It was beautiful," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. The next few days were a blur. Iris wouldn't leave the cabin, wouldn't eat or speak. She spent most of her time sitting by the window, staring out at the ridge. I tried to convince her to leave, to pack up and go back to the city, but she refused. "It won't let us," she said, her voice flat. I started hearing things at night, soft whispers outside the windows, the creak of footsteps on the porch. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the shadows, but whenever I looked, there was nothing there. The storm had knocked down trees across the road, effectively trapping us. I spent days clearing them, working until my hands were raw and blistered, driven by the desperate need to get Iris away from this place. But for every tree I moved, it seemed like two more fell during the night. Iris grew paler, thinner. She stopped eating entirely, surviving only on water and occasional sips of tea. When I tried to force her to eat, she vomited immediately, her body rejecting anything solid. "It's changing me," she told me one night, her voice barely audible. "From the inside out." I found strange marks on her skin, long, thin scratches that she couldn't explain, bruises in the shape of fingerprints on her arms and neck. Her hair began to fall out in clumps, and her beautiful eyes became sunken, the irises fading from warm brown to a pale, milky color. I tried everything. I called for help on our dead phone, hoping against hope that somehow the signal would get through. I tried to carry her to the truck, but she fought me with surprising strength, scratching and biting until I had to let her go. I even considered knocking her unconscious, but I couldn't bring myself to hurt her more than she was already hurting. Then, one night, I woke up to find Iris standing at the window again. Her hand was pressed against the glass, her breath fogging up the pain. "It's back," she said softly. I didn't look. I didn't want to see. But deep down I knew it was true. The thing wasn't done with us. "Come away from the window, Iris," I pleaded, reaching for her hand. She shook her head. "It's calling me. Don't listen to it." She turned to me then, and in the moonlight I could see how much she'd changed. Her skin was stretched tight over her bones, her lips cracked and bleeding, her eyes almost completely white now. "I have to," she whispered. "I'm almost ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. She smiled, showing teeth that looked too sharp, too numerous. "To join it." I backed away from her, fear gripping my heart. This wasn't Iris anymore, whatever was standing. In front of me might have her face, her voice, but the woman I loved was gone. "What happens if you join it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I become like it, free from pain, from grief, from human limitations." She took a step toward me, her movements jerky, unnatural. "You could come too. We could be together, forever." I shook my head. "That's not living, Iris. That's not even existing." Her face hardened. "You don't understand. You never did." She turned back to the window. "It's time." I lunged for her, grabbing her arms, trying to pull her away from the window. She fought me, her nails, now long and sharp like claws, raking across my face, drawing blood. We struggled, knocking over furniture, shattering lamps, until finally I managed to pin her to the floor. "Listen to me, Iris," I gasped, blood dripping onto her face. "Whatever that thing is telling you, it's lying. It doesn't want to help you. It wants to consume you." For a moment I thought I saw recognition in her eyes, a flicker of the woman I'd loved. Then her mouth opened, and the sound that came out wasn't human. It was the same guttural noise the thing had made, vibrating through her chest, through my hands that held her down. The windows exploded inward, showering us with glass. The door splintered off its hinges, and cold air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of decay. I looked up to see the thing filling the doorway, its twisted body barely contained by the frame. Iris bucked beneath me, throwing me off with inhuman strength. She scrambled toward the thing, reaching for it like a child reaching for a parent. "No!" I screamed, grabbing for her ankle. My fingers brushed against her skin, but she was already out of reach, already at the threshold. The thing enveloped her in its long, emaciated arms, pulling her against its chest. For a second they stood there, Iris and the thing, silhouetted against the night sky. Then they were gone, disappearing into the darkness, leaving me alone in the ruined cabin. I don't know how we survived that night. It started with Iris waking me, her voice trembling. "It's here," she whispered. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. For a second I thought it was just another one of her trances, her strange connection to the thing that haunted us. But then I heard it too, the scraping sound, like nails dragging across the cabin walls. I bolted upright, grabbing the shotgun from the floor. The sound circled the cabin, slow and deliberate, like it wanted us to know it was there. Iris clung to me, trembling, her nails digging into my arm. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. I just knew we couldn't stay. The sound stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was worse. It pressed down on us, thick and suffocating. Then the door rattled. I aimed the shotgun, my hands shaking. "Stay behind me," I told Iris, though my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. The door creaked open an inch, the wood splintering as something pushed against it, and then it came. The thing squeezed through the opening, its partly decayed body contorting, limbs bending at impossible angles. It filled the room with its presence, towering over us. Its eyeless face turned toward me. It didn't move, but I could feel it, sense it, crawling into my mind. My thoughts twisted, my vision blurred, and I felt like I was falling, even though I hadn't moved. Iris screamed, snapping me back. I fired the shotgun, the sound deafening in the small cabin. The thing recoiled, its body jerking violently, but it didn't fall. Instead, it screeched, a sound so loud and piercing it felt like it was splitting my skull. I grabbed Iris's hand and ran, dragging her toward the back door. We stumbled into the storm, the rain freezing against our skin. The forest was alive with noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling, the sound of heavy footsteps chasing us. "Don't look back," I shouted, pulling Iris with me as we sprinted toward the truck. The thing was close. I could hear its guttural breathing, feel the ground trembling beneath its weight. Iris tripped, falling into the mud, and for a horrifying second, I thought it was over. I yanked her up, practically carrying her the rest of the way. When we reached the truck, I threw open the door and shoved her inside. My hands fumbled with the keys as I climbed in, the shotgun clattering to the floor. The engine roared to life, and I slammed on the gas. The tires spun in the mud, the truck lurching forward as the thing burst from the tree line. It was faster than I thought possible, its long limbs skittering across the ground like some grotesque spider. It reached for us, its claws scraping against the tailgate as the truck finally found traction and shot forward. We didn't stop driving. Not for miles. Not until the forest thinned and the lights of the town came into view. Only then did I pull over, my hands still gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. Iris was silent beside me, staring straight ahead. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, but she didn't cry. Neither did I. Finally, she broke the silence. "We can't go back," she whispered. I nodded. "We won't." We packed up the cabin the next day. I didn't care about leaving things behind. Half our stuff wasn't worth the risk. We drove away with what little we could carry, the weight of that place still clinging to us like a shadow. I've thought about what happened 100 times since then, but I still can't make sense of it. Was the thing real? Was it some kind of emaciated human driven to madness by isolation? Or was it a manifestation of our worst fears, brought to life by grief and isolation? I don't know, and I don't want to. All I know is we barely made it out alive. And no matter how much Iris insists she feels better now, no matter how far we've gone, I still wake up some nights to the sound of her whispering in her sleep. Sometimes I catch her staring out the window, her gaze distant, her lips moving silently. And in those moments I wonder if we ever really escaped. But one thing is certain. We will never, ever go back into those woods. Months have passed. We moved to a small apartment in the city, surrounded by noise and light and people. Iris recovered slowly. The hollowness in her eyes faded, her appetite returned, and the strange marks on her skin healed, leaving only faint scars that she covers with long sleeves. We don't talk about what happened. Not to each other, not to the therapist we started seeing, not to anyone. Some things are better left in the dark. But sometimes, when Iris thinks I'm not looking, she traces patterns on the windowsill, intricate spirals that remind me too much of the bone arrangements we found in the woods. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, when the shadows lengthen across our bedroom floor, I swear I can hear it, that soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across the wall. And I know deep down that it found us, that it's watching, waiting, that some part of Iris still belongs to it, will always belong to it, that someday it will come for her again. And next time, I might not be able to save her,